This is the Water Quality Association podcast, promoting the betterment of water quality around the world. And hello, I'm your host, Wes Bleed.
So in this case, Republicans obviously performed very well. Republicans don't have a whole bunch of incentive to go out and cut deals with Democrats if they can kick the can down the road and address some of these big priorities that are on their plate next year when they have a much better voting base in their favor in both chambers. Then they're likely to do that.
This is Ted Mondloch with Banner Public Affairs, WQA's public affairs consultant in Washington, talking about the 2024 elections and what they mean for the water treatment industry. And welcome to the weekly podcast from the Water Quality Association, the leading voice of the residential, commercial, and industrial water treatment community. Find us at WQA.org. If you're joining us for the first time, we're glad you're here. Be sure to subscribe and like the podcast so you never miss a show. That's the magic of podcasting. And be sure to share the podcast with someone you know. We also feature our podcasts on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/Water Quality Association videos. In this podcast, we feature highlights from a recent WQA Government Affairs Report about the 2024 elections in the United States. What do the upcoming changes mean for the water treatment industry from both a regulatory as well as legislative standpoint? What about WQA's Healthy H2O Act? We'll also look at how the elections affected state legislatures and issues across the country. And we'll look ahead to what we can expect in 2025. The update features WQA's Government Affairs Director, Jeremy Pollack, WQA Government Affairs Manager, Paige O'Malley, and we begin the report with Ted Mondloch with Banner Public Affairs in Washington.
So most important and notable for water quality policy, though, amongst the appointments is Lee Zeldin was appointed to run the EPA and serve as the next administrator. So a little bit about Zeldin, kind of a surprising pick. He was a member of Congress from New York, representing Long Island for several terms. He then ran an unsuccessful gubernatorial campaign in New York. And he's a little bit of an interesting pick. I mentioned that because he doesn't have a deep background or deep career history in environmental policy or water policy. He hasn't served as the head of an environmental state organization or anything like that. He hasn't served on committees in Congress during his time that worked closely on water policy. You compare that to some of the other picks in past years, like Administrator Regan was the head of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, and other folks that have been chosen in the past. It's a little bit of a different approach. That's not all to say that Zeldin doesn't have a background or a past history of doing some things on water. During his time in Congress, he was relatively vocal on PFAS. He was part of a bipartisan group of legislators that were focused on the issue. He supported kind of the regional environmental programs that support clean water in New York. He was a part of the bipartisan climate caucus, things like that. But it's still a bit of an unconventional pick. He released a statement talking about when he was appointed, talking about the efforts he'll take to kind of advance the Trump agenda of reining in environment, environmental regulations, and a lot of what he focused on in that statement was things outside of water, right? Focused on energy policy and in other areas. So that leads me to kind of the next important appointment for water policy. Perhaps the most important will be who's nominated to be the assistant administrator for the Office of Water at EPA. That ends up being the person who really gets more into the weeds and of enacting regulations or rewriting regulations or whatever the mandate will be. So there's been some early names floated for that position, folks that the Banner team thankfully knows very well. Certainly don't want to throw them all out there right now, but it's something we're tracking closely, and we're excited to see who that person ends up being. So then, typically after the 2 months or so after the election, after a presidential election like this, you see this lame duck period, which is where folks are on their way out of office. They, want to get things done. They don't have much time left. So you see a lot of, deal making and negotiating, things like that, that come across the finish line. That is something that happens a lot less when we're in the situation we're in now, where one party is kind of swept in the elections. So in this case, Republicans obviously performed very well. Republicans don't have a whole bunch of incentive to go out and cut deals with Democrats if they can kick the can down the road and address some of these big priorities that are on their plate next year when they have a much better voting base in their favor. In both chambers, then they're likely to do that. So we're anticipating a much quieter end of the year. There's certain bills like the defense bill that they'll have to take care of. They take care of that every year. They'll have to push, funding the government down the line, but they'll do that and address FY25 appropriations, early into next year. One really interesting one that is critical for WQA and the Healthy H2O Act is the Farm Bill. So, the Farm Bill has been, they were originally planning to, supposed to take care of it by 2023. There was a year-long extension enacted. And now we're at the point where they need to address it in some form or fashion by the end of the year, whether it's another extension, which we see as the most likely, or actually writing a new Farm Bill. So that's another one where we're hearing the intelligence on the Hill is that they're just going to extend, and then Senators Bozeman and Klobuchar will work together with their House counterparts to get something across the finish line that's probably a little bit more in line with the Republican priorities. Some things may be cut out of it. We are very confident that the Healthy H2O Act is still well positioned to move in a Republican farm bill versus a more bipartisan farm bill. So that's one we're tracking closely and meeting with folks on. And then just looking at the start of the next Congress in general, you hear this a lot. It's the biggest buzzword right now in DC is the first 100 days. So what's that going to look like under a Trump administration? So, there's going to be a lot of executive orders that kind of fall in line with President-elect Trump's, primary campaign promises, things related to the more hot button issues like immigration and trade policy and things along those lines. Congress will get started immediately drafting legislation that is, in line with those priorities as well, thinking of things that are, taking more of a deregulatory approach, things of that nature. Some of the biggest fights in Congress this year will relate to spending, as I've kind of alluded to. So dealing with the FY25 appropriations bill will be one to watch really closely. And there's going to be attempts at making cuts, but where are those cuts going to fall? The water sector is, doing what it can to ensure those cuts don't come to key water programs. There's also, a big thing that's going to be on the radar starting next year is the passage of a tax bill. That's one of their biggest priorities that Republicans are likely to address, starting right in the beginning of the Congress. From there, I want to talk a little bit about the regulatory agenda as well, a little bit more on what Zeldin and his team might be up to as they get into office and, or Senate confirmed, he gets Senate confirmed and things get rolling. So, like I've mentioned, there's going to be a mandate from the top down to streamline regulations, and cut things and scale them back. This is typical anytime there's a new president in power. They want to get their agenda in there as opposed to the president of the opposing party before them. We expect it to be a little bit more ramped up this time around. So what does that mean for kind of WQA's main priorities? So, lead, the LCRI was just finalized just a couple of weeks ago. That's one where, we see a high likelihood that the LCRI would be scaled back into, back towards what the Trump LCRR rule was that was finalized a couple of years ago. So that's one we're looking out for and meeting with folks at the agency level and congressional stakeholders as well to ensure that all the advancements in the LCRI related to the prioritization of filters can be included in a final rule that is rewritten. Same thing with PFAS, right? So the PFAS rulemaking is a little bit different because it's tied up in the courts right now, but it's likely that will end up with a Trump administration sort of rewriting the maximum contaminant level rule and kind of just making tweaks to PFAS regulations in general. Another one we're paying really close attention to. And then also just quick note on FIFRA, trying to come up with an alternative compliance pathway or even just creating an exemption for water quality products in general from that regulation. That's something where we see, conversely, a really strong avenue towards pursuing new regulations in that space that are much more friendly to the industry. So I'll stop there. Jeremy, is there anything I missed?
No, thank you so much. We really
Yeah.
appreciate your insights. I'll just emphasize, as you alluded to, right, the lame duck will be slower time from a congressional standpoint. But here at WQA, we're going to use this time wisely to re-emphasize many of our federal priorities. So with the Healthy H2O Act, that piece of legislation that WQA crafted with input from its members, we're certainly going to be meeting with our congressional champions over these last few days of the year and make sure that we're ready for reintroduction of that bill and continue to get support, not just from the members who supported it over the previous 2 years, but also maybe new members of Congress who are coming in who we need to educate and engage with anyways. So next, we're going to be passing the microphone over to Paige O'Malley, WQA's Government Affairs Manager. She's going to walk us through the state elections, what that means for WQA and our members.
Hi, good morning, everyone. For y'all's information, a trifecta is when one party controls the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. So kind of like what we're assuming Trump is rolling into at the federal level, where Republicans are controlling all the branches, this is what we're seeing at the state level after the 2024 election. And not all states had elections this year, or they had elections for some things and not others. So it's a little bit more of a piecemeal at the state level. But you can see 23 trifectas for the Republicans, 15 for Democrats, and then those gray states are divided government. I'm here in Virginia, so I can tell you divided government in Virginia looks like 2 Democratic chambers and a Republican governor. But this could be any combination of those. I'm sure many of you in the Midwest know that combination looks different as well. This is what we have done over the course of the last few years. As you can see, depending on who's in session, how long those sessions are, the number of bills we've tracked have fluctuated, but compared to 2015, the 84, 85 bills I believe we tracked before my time, obviously, 278 is a lot more than that. So I think this both reflects our efforts advocacy-wise and our focus, but it also reflects a focus nationally on water issues. And I think we can expect that to continue. Folks are very focused on their water. We also did 21 letters this past year. I had the honor to help with a couple of those, but not nearly all of them. So thank you, Jeremy. And prior it was 15 and 10 in those years respectively. And of course, fly-ins has seen the most drastic increase. 2022 was a little bit of an outlier. Post-COVID, a lot of meetings were still virtual, but there were still a lot of meetings happening, just not your traditional fly-ins. California, 2023, kind of brought back our first state fly-in, and this doesn't include our congressional. So this past year, we did 5 different fly-ins, and we're excited to keep working on more fly-ins in the coming years as well. What that number will look like, not quite sure. But now to pop over to that next slide, here is a bit of a heat map of what those legislative priorities looked like this past year. You can see based on those numbers up top that New Jersey actually had more legislation than California this year. So they were very, very top of mind with water quality issues. And I don't expect that to slow down, but we are planning on doing some work in some other states as well that we haven't done as much work in. Virginia and Washington are already going to be pretty focused on in 2025 as we work in those legislative sessions. And I think we can look forward to even more from this heat map in the coming years. So I will kick that over to you, Jeremy, and we can look at what 2025 holds.
So what we're looking at in 2025 is to continue to build those efforts, utilizing our tracking software and being very transparent with our members through our newsletter, right, of what bills we're tracking, what we think are priorities, how do we engage, and especially at the local level, working with our members when they have issues, and they can reach out through govaffairs@wqa.org if there's an issue you're working on. Going forward, we're definitely going to look at Hill Days in California again. Texas, we know, has one planned at the end of February. Florida did one this past year that we're hoping that they'll continue again, and looking to continue to expand that again in Minnesota, where they've done them previously, and maybe even in Virginia, where Paige has quite a bit of experience there with their state legislature. However, if your state was not mentioned, we are happy to work with you to plan a state legislative day. So please, reach out if you have interest in meeting with your lawmakers. We can help identify who your representatives are and either set up a meeting potentially virtually on where you're located, or set up a day with some of your fellow members to actually go into their offices and meet with them. Within our Gov Affairs Committee, we're certainly going to be refocusing a lot on where we can have a big impact on states. Part of that will be the Safe Drinking Water Act. That is a federal regulation that stipulates how point of use and point of entry systems can be used when it comes to compliance for federal drinking water standards. So that law sets also those drinking water standards in general, but also those treatment solutions. A lot of states have their own specific stipulations with that. So Ohio is an example I've given before, where they have a lot of issues with a number of contaminants. Sometimes it's lead, sometimes it's PFAS, but in their specific state regulation, a municipality can only use water treatment to treat arsenic, but not other contaminants. And so as we start looking at state policies, I think that's going to be a focus going forward for the Gov Affairs Committee and WQA in general. We're also looking at what are some trends in legislation and how do we maybe turn that into a template bill that we can reintroduce in some of those states that were gray on that heat map that aren't doing that much on water quality. We have seen this general increase overall, but certainly want to make sure that not just one state's doing a lot to improve the water quality for the residents, but really making sure that we're looking at this from a national angle as well. So very excited to continue working on that. And certainly if you're not a member of the Government Affairs Committee, please reach out. We can add you as an observer in the meantime. And certainly we have a number of voting member slots as well as we look at the next association year.
Our WQA tip, the Congressional Summit, and the WQA Fly-In are set for March 25th and 26th, 2025 in Washington, D.C. Now, this is the annual Trek to Washington by WQA members who are calling on members of Congress, both in the House as well as the Senate, to help them understand water quality and water treatment options. It's a great time to have influence and have your voice heard in our nation's capital. Go to our website for more information, WQA.org. Thanks for joining us for the Water Quality Association podcast, bringing you the latest news and insights from the association, our members, and outside experts to help you better serve your customers and grow your business. Learn more about water and water treatment at our consumer website, betterwatertoday.org, and learn more about professional certification, product certification, and how you can become a WQA member at WQA.org. Until next time, this is Wes Bleed. So long from the Water Quality Association.